For our weapons, we're gonna start off with our pistol. Okay, so I'm gonna hop in here, and first things first, I'm gonna make this thing a little smaller so when it gets put into our hands, it's not taking up the whole screen. Same thing with machine gun, actually. Let's just do that while we're here. Make it smaller. And maybe to tell the difference between the two, I'm just gonna make this a little longer. So let me just see what that looks like when we run it. Okay, so that's a machine gun right there. Pick it up. And we're holding it sideways, so I extended it in the wrong direction. Let's try that one more time. Rotate it this way. This time it's just the pistol. All right, that's what our pistol looks like for now. Okay, looking good. So I'm gonna start in this pistol, and I'm gonna come down here and add an FSM on it. And I'm gonna call this pistol. Okay, so for our first state, I'm gonna call this idle. This is just when we're holding it. And instead of giving an action here, what I'm gonna do is put a transition. So in events, I'm gonna put fire 1. And I'm gonna set this as a global event. But instead of adding it as a global transition over here, I'm just gonna add it as a normal transition. And then I'm gonna have that send off to the next state right here. So that way we can give our player an FSM that will fire this off. So just to see this in action right now, I'm gonna go over to our player, add a component, playmaker FSM, and we're gonna call this one PlayerShoot. Okay, and inside of this FSM, we're gonna put in a set event target. And then I'm gonna put in a get button down. So for the set event target, I'm gonna change this to a game object, and we're gonna specify the game object as our attach game object. And we're gonna check this box for send to children. And the event that it's gonna send is global event fire 1. So what's happening here is anything that gets set as a child of this attach game object is gonna get this fire 1 event when we set it off. If we click fire 1, this send event is gonna send fire 1. Now, what is this fire 1 button name? So in case you didn't know, if you come up here to edit, project settings, and then input manager, you have your axes here. And the way that Unity deals with your player input is in these axes. So an axes is just the name of the sort of abstraction for the input. So you can see you have fire, but you can also have jump and submit. You could put in your own like use or crouch. Now these are the ones that are mostly set up by default. So what I'm gonna do is come over here to fire 1 and just double check what everything is set as. So for its name, fire 1, that's how it's spelled. You even need to get the capitalization right. Everything needs to be exactly as it is written out here. So you would type this in this button name area, and this get button down is gonna be listening for whatever its buttons are. So for this one, its positive button is left control, and its alt positive button is mouse 0, which is another way of saying left clicking. You could set these to whatever controls you want, and that list of controls, what to actually write for each of them, can be found by clicking this question mark to open the reference for input manager. Okay, but for now, this is good. We just want something that when we left click, it does something. So I'm gonna run it. Okay, so if I come and pick this up, it gets attached here, right? Now, if I click on my attach, you can see that our pistol is now a child of it. And when I click, you're gonna see that this will get fired off. See that? So I clicked. Now in our pistol game object over here, let's finish setting this up. So right here, we're gonna have a check ammo state. And what we'll use is an int compare. Now this int compare is gonna check a new variable that we'll call ammo count, and it'll compare it to 0. And if it's equal or less than, we're gonna tell it, don't fire because you're out of ammo. So I'm gonna for equal, we'll say try again. We're gonna say for less than as well. And it'll send over here to another state where we'll have a click. So there'll be a sound effect here. We'll come back later to do the audio stuff, but this is the state that will tell it to play the click sound of an empty gun. For now, we'll just add this finish transition and send back up to idle. Make sure that this is our ammo count variable. So if our ammo count is ever 0 or less than 0, it's gonna make a click sound and then come back to here. But if it's greater than, it's gonna go next. And that'll take you to the next state where we'll have shoot. In the shoot, we're gonna have a screen pick, which is a way of sending a raycast out into the scene from the camera. And the way that we decide where the raycast gets sent out from is by adding in a screen vector. So what we could do is say that halfway across the x-axis, which is halfway across the screen horizontally, and then halfway across the y-axis, which is halfway across the screen vertically, that is the center of the screen, and that's where we're aiming, and that's where the screen pick should be cast from. So halfway across that axis and halfway across that axis is kind of like saying 0.5 in x and 0.5 in y. So in order for these coordinates to work, we have to select normalized. And then the game object that we hit will be a new variable called hit object. And then for the layer mask, we'll add one layer saying ignore raycast, and we're going to invert this mask. So whatever number you put in here, if you put 3, that says that there's 3 layers to choose from. Put 4, etc. But we only want 1 for now. And by selecting this invert mask, it's saying, if you put your mouse over this, invert the mask so you pick from all of the layers except those defined above. So in other words, this screen pick will interact with everything in the world except for the things that are on the ignore raycast layer. This is going to come in handy for us when there are colliders in the world that we want the raycast to ignore, like with the invisible colliders around pickups, for example. And then what we want to do is put in a game object is null. The game object will be the hit object. And then is null, we'll have try again. We'll add that transition. And it'll go down to the next state where we will subtract ammo. But if it does hit something, which is saying is not null, then we're going to go to next. We'll add this, and that will fire off to the next state. Just move this up, which we'll call hit something. Now here is where we could put in a compare tag. Game object compare tag will have it compare the tag of the hit object, so it's checking what tag it has. And we want it to only do something if the object is tagged as an enemy. So let's add in a new tag we'll call enemy. So over here, change this tag to enemy. Okay, and if that's true, we'll go to next, add this, and it'll go to the next state, which will have deal damage. But if it's not an enemy, then we'll have to try again, and it'll just send down here to subtract ammo. We still fired the shot, but we just didn't hit an enemy. So over here in deal damage, we'll have a set event float data and a send event. And the way this works is that when you send an event, you have the option to send some information along with that event. In our case, we want to send some float data with it. So on the other end, we'll be using a get event float data. So this action will be used over in the zombie prefab, where it will receive the thing that we sent from this. So I'm just going to delete this for now. And the event float data that we'll send is 5. So that's 5 damage that we'll be dealing to the zombie. And we're going to be sending this to the game object FSM, specifying the object as the hit object, right? Because that will be a zombie. And we'll send it to the Health FSM. The event will be damage. Okay, so in our zombie Health FSM, there will be a damage event that will send off to some state where it'll have a get event float data that will receive this 5, and then we'll have it take that damage. That's all we need here. And what we could do is just move this down, add a finished state, send to subtract ammo, and then in subtract ammo, we'll have an int add ammo count, and we're going to add -1. Alternatively, you can use an int subtract and just subtract 1. This is just another way of subtracting 1. Then we'll add a wait action. And this wait action is just a way of making a small buffer between each of the shot. That way the player can't just spam these shots. The buffer will be something like 0.1, or let's say even 0.25. And we could adjust this if we find that it's too fast or too slow. And then when it's done, go to next, send, where it'll go back up to idle. And this is pretty much our pistol FSM. So it's idle, waiting for us to fire. When it gets the event fire 1, it checks if there's any ammo to shoot. If there is not, it'll just make a click sound and come back here. But if it does have ammo, it'll go over here to shoot, which will send off this screen pick at the center of the screen. It'll check if it actually hit something. If it didn't, then it's just going to subtract ammo and come back here. But if it did, then it will go to this hit something, where it'll check if the tag lines up with this, which is enemy. So if it doesn't hit an enemy, it'll just subtract ammo and go back to the start. But if it does hit an enemy, then it'll deal damage to that enemy by setting up a float data with a send event. So in just a moment, we're going to set up our enemy to receive this damage. And after that does get sent off, we subtract ammo and come back to the idle state. Okay, so now let's set up our zombies to receive damage. Now, if you see over here, we said that we're going to name it health. So I'm going to copy this. I'm going to come over to our zombie. So on our zombie, we're going to want hitboxes on all of the limbs and on the chest and on the head. An easy way to set that up would be to just select the zombie models object, right click on it, 3D object, ragdoll. And in here, we can drag and drop all of the bones and body parts of the zombie. Let's start with this head down here, right? Obviously, this one is labeled head and it should be a little bit more obvious, but we can see that down here is where our head is. Middle spine becomes a little less obvious, but we'll put in our spine number 2. And then right elbow will be from right here, elbow_R. And then shoulder_R is where right arm will be. Left elbow will be elbow_L. Left arm will be shoulder_L. Right foot will be ankle_R. Right knee will be lower leg_R. Right hips will be upper leg_R. And then the same thing will happen with this left side. So ankle for left foot, lower leg for left knee, upper leg for left hips. And then for pelvis, this is hips. And now when we hit create, we could see if we turned on one of these models that it pretty much lines up how we need this. All the colliders are nice and organized. We can make some adjustments, and we'll even leave some of these as bigger than the actual model to make it generous for the players to hit them a little bit more easily. But the one that is a little small is the head. So we can come over here to the head and just increase this radius, and something like that should be pretty good. So yeah, that's looking pretty good. And now that we have all of these colliders set up for these body parts, what we could do is set up FSMs on each of them that will detect when bullets hit them and deal the appropriate amount of damage. So for example, arms would do a lot less damage to this zombie than the torso, and the torso would do a lot less damage than the head. The head would just be an insta-kill. You know, we don't want an insta-kill off of a shot that hit their arm. And the setup for that is actually pretty straightforward. We're gonna put these FSMs on here that receive the damage, and then have a little multiplier that say how much to multiply that damage, which then gets sent up to this root FSM that we'll make on our zombie game object. So I'm going to add that component right now. We'll call this health, but this is going to be different from all of the health FSMs on the rest of these body parts. So for now, I'm just going to leave this alone. And first we're going to take care of these body parts. So for example, we could start with the head. Scroll down here, select the head, and I'm going to add an FSM. And we're going to call it health. And then in here, I'll add a state. And this will just be our initialization state. But here is where we will have deal damage. And then of course, we're going to add that global transition. Damage. Make it red. And we're gonna use that get event float data that I was telling you about. So this is gonna receive the float data that's sent off from our gun, and this will be our damage. And then we're gonna have a float multiply, and we're gonna multiply that damage amount by a new variable that we'll call damage multiplier. And then we're gonna set event float data, that damage, after it's been multiplied, and we're gonna send an event. This time, we're sending that final calculation off to our health root. Now, I could just drag and drop this in here, but then that would prevent us from being able to templatize this FSM. So instead, what I'm gonna do is make it a variable and call it zombie root. And I'm gonna tell it this is the health FSM, and we're gonna be sending the damage event. Now, this is empty right now, so what I have to do is come over here to variables, and zombie root, I'm gonna select input, and same thing with damage multiplier, I'm gonna select input. And what that does is it reveals it here in the inspector, and this way when we templatize it, we'll still be able to put a custom value for each of these. So now with that set up, I'm gonna have this save template, and you'll see that when you make a template, it's being saved as a .asset file here in your Playmaker templates folder. So I'm gonna call this one zombie health type. And it's asking us if we want to use this template in this FSM. Yep. It's good to note that the FSM is still called health, even though that we're using a template called something different. So what we could do is with this damage multiplier, since this one is on the head, I could put it something crazy like 999, and the zombie root will be this. So what's cool is that we can come over to our hips, which also has its box collider, and we could just add component FSM, except now we can come over here to this FSM tab, ... no category, zombie health type, and it adds the template in there. And here we could put a multiplier that is something like 0.5, so it deals half the damage of whatever we're sending to it. And then the zombie root, of course, we want this in there. I think spine 2 also has a box collider on it. I think this should deal a very similar amount of damage, so I'm just gonna copy this component and paste it onto spine 2. Paste component is new. Okay, so it also does the same amount of damage. But for the arms, for basically all the limbs, we want a different setup. So I'm gonna paste that component in, but I'm gonna change the damage multiplier to 0.1. So this does the least amount of damage when you hit them in the arms and stuff. So I'm gonna copy this component, and it's the elbows and shoulder game objects that we want to paste these to. So I'm going to paste it into this one really quick. Paste component is new, right? So these two have it, and I'm going to come over to this shoulder and this elbow. I can select both of them by holding Control on Windows or holding Command on Mac. And with both of them selected, I can come over here and paste component is new, and it'll give that Playmaker component to both of them. Same thing with the legs. It's the upper leg and lower leg. So I'm gonna go ahead and select upper leg and lower leg for both the left and right leg. And then right click, paste as new. And now, if I make these gizmos a little smaller, we can see that we have FSMs on each of the limbs and the torso parts and the head of our zombie. And when each of them get hit, they'll have specific damage amounts that will get sent to the root game object. So there's a little bit more variation in how we can shoot these guys up. Okay, I'm gonna collapse this root and then turn off this game object. So everything's looking pretty good. The last thing that we need to do here is come to the root object and set up this health FSM. All right, so this is going to be our initialization state. We're gonna add another state, and this one will be the deal damage state. And we'll have the get float data. This will be the damage. And we'll have a float subtract. And the float variable we're going to be subtracting from will be a new one called health. and we're going to be subtracting damage from that health. So what we could do is come up to variables, and in our health, our zombies will have something like 10 health points. And then we're going to add this global transition, damage, and we'll add a finish transition that comes down here to the next state where we check the damage. That'll be a float compare, and that'll be comparing our health to 0. And if it's equal or less than, that means we're dead. Okay, so equal or less than, and it gets sent over here to dead. You know how I roll with this, with red. Now here we can do a set bool value, and we'll have a new value called is dead, and it'll be set to true. So we could use this value to change some other things in the scene. And we'll have an animator play, and this is going to be playing off of this game object. Now we don't have a death animation, so I'm gonna run to Mixamo and grab a death animation really quick. Okay, I'm gonna put death, and let's see how this looks. No, but zombie death. There we go. That's the one we want. So I'm going to go ahead and download this. FBX for Unity. Without skin. Download. Saving it in my FBX backups. And I'm going to just call this one Death. Go to my animations. And in FBX backups, under Death, I'm going to select, I'm going to change this Death to humanoid. Gonna apply it. Take this animation file, Control D or Command D on a Mac. With this new file, I'm gonna rename it Death, and I'm gonna put it up here in the animations folder. Okay, so now it's right here. So now I can put it in here. Now we have this death animation. So I could call it Death. So our death animation will play. Now that our zombie's dead, we also don't want our nav mesh agent running. This can just get in the way of some things. So we're going to deactivate it by clicking and dragging this component into our state. And then we're going to have a set property. And the property that we want to set is enabled. And the value that we want to set, we're just going to leave this blank because that's a way of disabling it. If you check this, that would be enabling it. It's already enabled, so we want to turn this thing off. And we're also going to want to disable this FSM. So I can click and drag that into here as well. And we're going to have state machine, enable FSM. And we're going to disable it. And we do not want to reset on exit. So it just disables that FSM, so our zombie doesn't try to do anything once it's dead. Okay, so this is all set up. But we're going to hop over to one of our templates. And we're just going to finish up some stuff here too. So right now it deals this damage and it sends it off, but it doesn't account for what happens when the zombie is dead. So let's figure that out. We'll add a finish transition and have it send off to another state where we'll do a check is dead. So here's where we're going to be doing a get FSM bool and a bool test. So the game object that FSM is on will be from our zombie root, and the FSM is health, and the variable name is dead. And remember that you need to spell these exactly how they're spelled with the same capitalization and everything. I'm going to copy and paste this into the new variable because it's called the same thing. It'll be getting that is dead bool, and then we're going to check it, and if it's true, we'll have a new event called true. And if it's false, we'll have a new event false. Okay, so true will send here and false will send here. This one will be dead and this one will be alive. And in dead, remember earlier we were talking about raycast stuff with layers. So here is where we want to do a set layer action, which will change this collider's layer to ignore raycast. And that way, they don't get in the way of other things that we want to be shooting once they're dead. And alive, we could just leave alone. I think this is pretty good to go now. Let's give it a shot. Gonna run this, and cool, we got a pistol. But you know what, you see how my mouse stays outside of the screen? That's gonna be a problem, because if I click, it's gonna click out here, and we want it to stay in the center of the screen. So I'm gonna stop this actually, and we're gonna go ahead and pop into our player. And for PlayerShoot, let's just put in a set mouse cursor action. This will be at the top, and we're gonna hide the cursor and lock the cursor. And in just a little bit, we'll even add a reticle to the screen, but let's see how this works out with our current weapon system. Okay, grab this pistol, and I'm gonna shoot this zombie. Right now, we don't really have any feedback other than being able to check the zombie that we're fighting against. So let's see. I'd like to think that I was hitting. Okay, but nothing's happening there. None of these objects are tagged as zombie. So we need to stop this and hop over to our zombie. And we'll take the hips, spine, shoulder, elbows, all of our body parts, head, okay, and tag them as enemy. Now let's give this a shot. And I think that's center of the screen. Let's pause it really quick. And this is the zombie that I'm trying to shoot. Let's see if we're making any hits. No hits there. No hits there. No hits there. Could check the pistol to see what's happening. Okay, so the pistol is never getting to the shoot part. Why is that? Look at that, ammo count never got set. So we need to give this thing some ammo first. Let's just do it while we're here. Value, let's say 50, just for now. And then let's keep running the scene. There we go. So I'm clicking all around. Let's see if any of these hit. Proximity bubble. Aha! So the proximity bubble on our zombie is something that we're hitting. See, this is exactly the kind of thing that I'm talking about that you need to have these layer masks for. So we could put our proximity bubble on a different layer, the ignore raycast layer. Okay, so our zombie, come down to proximity bubble. We're going to change this layer to ignore raycast. When we pasted in these FSMs, we never rename them health. They still say FSM. Okay, so let's go back and make sure that these zombies are named correctly. Health. Health. The head was the only one that we named correctly. And then while we're here in our weapons, pistol, variables, ammo count, let's start with 50 rounds. See how that does us. Okay. Grabbing our pistol. Let's see the FSM. And gonna shoot that zombie. In the deal damage state, we hit the hips. Let's take a look at the hips FSM. And sure enough, we dealt some damage. Okay, so we hit the hips. It sent 2.5 damage up to this root FSM. Let's check out the health. That received it, and it brought our zombie's health down to 7.5. So if we keep shooting this guy, And as long as we actually land some hits on him. Oh no, I'm not landing hits. Oh god. It's a lot harder than it looks. You know what we need is a reticle, because I can't aim without a reticle. So we're hopping over to the Hutong Games YouTube channel, and this is where you can watch the dynamic reticle tutorial. So go ahead and check out the tutorial to see how to make it yourself. But while we're here, I'm also just going to download the scene, and I'm going to save it in my packages. And then here in my packages, I'm going to double click on the player reticle package and I'll import it. Then I'm going to search reticle in my assets. And you can see we have a scene here that I'm just going to run side by side. We have this UI canvas that has a reticle in it, and it has an FSM that has all this good stuff set up. So it'll turn red on things that are dangerous, green on things that are safe, and white on things that just don't matter. So I'm going to go ahead and drag this UI canvas up here into our level. And the only thing that we're going to change is what the game object it has set in here. So I'm going to remove this scene, not saving it. And in my reticle, see it says missing game object. This is where we could just drag our own player cameras in here. Here you can see the reticle is checking for info. This is just to write some information about whatever we're looking at. But really all we're focusing on is this danger color. We're looking at this getFSM bool, which checks the FSM called info for a variable called isDangerous. What that means is that we can make an FSM on our zombies called info and make a variable called isDangerous. So I'm going to copy this isDangerous text, come over to our zombie, and in our Health FSMs, I'm going to make a new variable, a bool. I'm going to paste that in there, isDangerous, and the value is true. And then over here for our reticle, I'm just going to change the FSM name to health, so it just checks the Health FSM. You could even leave it blank, and that would just check the first FSM component on whatever game object it hits. So this might even work right now if we run this. Let's test it out. Yep. So if we get close enough, our reticle turns red whenever we're looking at zombies. Well, this rifle doesn't work right now, so I have to stop the scene so I can get myself a pistol. All right, let's get this pistol. And I'm gonna go for this headshot. Boom. And that is a perfectly executed zombie. Now if I could shoot the back a bunch, and then they die. And you can even shoot the arms, but it takes even more. I'm clicking a bunch right now. So many shots on this arm. And then eventually they die. Alright, so the first zombie was an insta-kill because I got the headshot. Second zombie took a few more hits because I was shooting the middle of the body. And then this zombie took a ton of hits because I was just shooting the hand. Or anywhere on the arms for that matter. Alright, so our damage system is working perfectly fine. We have a reticle that works, and we have a pistol that is tying that all up. So the next thing I'm going to want to do is set up a machine gun. That way we actually have some variation in what kind of weapons we could pick up.